Good morning. How are you doing?
I'm wonderful. How are you today?
Very good. Very
Good.
good.
Where are you located?
Argentina.
Oh, Argentina. Right on. That's
So,
much more it's much more exotic than where I'm at in Kansas City.
oh, Kansas City. I did know you were in Kansas City. That's right.
Yeah. Well, that's cool. How's Argentina today?
Good. Good. We're heading into summer, so it's nice. It's nice and warm.
Okay. Yeah, we're heading into winter here. We're on the
Yeah.
other side of things. So, but it's great to meet you. Thank you for taking a minute out today to kind of open up your world of writing and what makes you who you are. And to begin that process, I want to ask you about the last 3.5 years, living through COVID, living through a pandemic. How did you get through it? And how did it change you?
Okay. Do you want me to just start talking now and say what
Yeah,
it did, or
I
you're
I
preparing?
I come from jazz radio, so I just
Right.
I
Just
tend
riff.
to go right in.
All right, cool. How it changed me. I mean, COVID was awful as it was for everybody. For me, it was a time where I cut a lot of things out. I stopped doing a lot of things. Basically, I went through everything and was like, do I want this? If the answer was yes, I continued. If the answer was no, I just stopped. So I mainly spent most of my time during COVID like writing. I wrote two books. Especially during the intense lockdown time. I wrote two books. I hung out with my family. I took walks. I did a lot of meditation. I just really slowed my life down. And in that sense, it was nice. Like not the fear, are we gonna die? Are we ever gonna get past this? Will life return to normal part? That I didn't particularly like, but being able to do things entirely on my terms and also kind of define who are my people,
Yeah.
because when there's only so many people you can spend time with, um, you figure out who you really want to spend that time with.
Yeah, I agree. So let's get to the heart and soul. I know you're a writer, but I want to get to the heart and soul of what you do as a profession on a daily basis. So if I put you in front of a bunch of third graders, it's career day, and one of the kids looks up and says, "Hey, what do you do for a living?" How would you answer that child?
I would say, is there a story you want to tell? And then I would say, well, I can help you tell that story. I can make it a better story. I can make people want to listen to you, and we can make it fun.
So in addition to what you do as a writer, you're helping others facilitate that process of getting it on paper correctly.
Well, yes. Yeah. I wouldn't necessarily say correct because there's so many ways to get things
Yeah,
on paper,
right.
but I get
Yeah.
it. Yeah. I
Yeah,
get it.
and my brain goes to being in journalism because I was so bad, chronically bad at like punctuation. As much as I focused on it, I could never get it just okay. I would be like, this is the time I'm not going to get any red marks back. And the whole thing came back and it looked like a Christmas ornament. It was bad. So
Oh,
yeah, it
I mean,
happens. It's
but I
fine.
can say I have my issues with schools in general, and I feel like red marks on a page is exactly the opposite of how I would teach writing. Because
Yeah.
from my perspective, working writers, we have editors, we have, editing tools. There are different things that we use. It's the story that's important. It's the saying, it's the taking somebody on a journey and getting somebody really pulled into what you're saying. It's also the process of doing that and having fun writing it and telling that story and deepening it and creating characters. So yeah, I don't particularly like that school. And when I've taught all ages, I've taught everything from eighth grade all the way through adult education. And now I work with adults. You'll never see a red mark from me ever,
Okay.
not once.
Yeah. So let's get to the beginnings of your journey. Where were you born and raised? How did writing become your passion and storytelling?
All right, so I have moved around a lot. So I'll go through that pretty quickly. I wasn't raised in any one place. I was born in South Africa, moved to Pennsylvania when I was 4. Then we moved to Little Rock, Arkansas, and then Atlanta. Then my senior year of high school, I lived in Israel. Then I moved back to New York. I spent a good amount of time in New York before we sold everything and then traveled. And then I was all over the place. So I guess I was born in South Africa, grew up with my grandparents for a couple years. And then I guess if I had to choose a place, it would be Atlanta that I was raised, but I was really only there for high school.
Okay. So how did the seeds of writing and storytelling and all of that become you?
Um, I always journaled. I was, moving from place to place. I was always sort of a shy kid, a little bit anxious, and a journal was always a good place to, dump whatever I was feeling and thinking. And I was also just my English classes, I enjoyed them. I had great teachers, and I think that had a lot to do with it. So I actually had one teacher in eighth grade who basically was like, I made the mistake of telling my parents I was bored, who that my in her class. And then my parents told her I was bored. So she's like, let's have you do some extra stuff. Like,
Ah,
great. So she pulls me aside and then starts asking me, she's like, okay, I want you to do a different paper every week, but it can be whatever you want. So sometimes it was on a topic that interested me and I would have to argue it. And sometimes it was a short story. And I would say I think that's where it really began for me, as opposed where instead of sort of dumping whatever thoughts I had into a journal, which had no shape and probably were very emotional, it was the first time that what I wrote really had a shape and I could start to see, oh wait, you can I hate to use this word, but it kind of is, you can manipulate people into feeling what you want. You can take them on a journey. And I think that's where it began for me. And then I just never stopped writing.
so what was the very first book for you that really made you think, I want more stories or I want to write?
A Wrinkle in Time. I was in fifth grade, so this was even earlier. But I just, and it's funny though because rereading it as an adult, I didn't actually like it as much. The movie brought back that original magic, but just that you could do. I read it, and the librarian pulled me aside. She gave me the book. She's like, "I think you'll like this." And then I read every other book I could find by Madeline L'Engle. But the book itself, just like, oh wait, stories can go out of the universe. You can create stuff. You can make up anything. You can create entire worlds. And so I think that was the book for me that just really captured my imagination and made me see it's the scope of what you could do, that it's not just like, here's my day, this is what I did, this is what I saw. You can just create what you want to create.
It's interesting. I asked somebody that probably a month and a half ago, and they answered that, and I'd never read it. And it actually really resonated well because of my age, and I'm a father, and just kind of where you're at in life. And it was fascinating. And it reminded me a little bit of what, like sci-fi writers would do. They would just kind of take the reality that we're used to and blend it in with this fantastical and mash it together into things where you just like had to have a childlike imagination and just believe, you know. So
Absolutely.
yeah.
And that's actually that's something I do love about sci-fi in general. I mean, I love sci-fi, and I think A Wrinkle in Time started that. But that suspension of disbelief, like almost all sci-fi requires that, like Doctor Who, for example.
Yeah.
And the David Tennant Doctor Who is my favorite.
Hmm.
And I love him. And there's so many things in that where you're like, oh, that's just not believable. But I'm willing to suspend disbelief. And the ability to get your readers, because you're not going to get everything perfect in anything you write, just to have people be like, yeah, but I don't care. I'm in love with this thing that I'm seeing. And the way it's, inspiring and bringing out my imagination. Yeah,
Yeah.
no,
So who's been a hero for you in your life?
all right. So I was listening to your podcast, so I'm actually prepared for this one.
Okay, good.
Um, So yeah, I thought about it. So two people really come to mind. So Maya Angelou. So one person famous, well known, one person who's also pretty famous actually, but she's a good friend of mine. So the famous person is Maya Angelou, in part because I remember hearing her read a poem. Still I Rise was the poem. My aunt put it on TV. She's like, you might like this. And I was just like, wow, like that's poetry. Because that was not the poetry that they'd been giving us in school.
Yeah.
It moved and it was alive and it was fun and interesting and spoke to things that I really loved. But the other thing I really admire about her is like, first of all, she's multi-talented. She was multi-talented. She wrote, danced, she sang, she kind of did everything. She was also a sex worker, and she was very clear about the fact that she was not going to be shamed, and she did not feel any shame for it. And I think in a world that does shame women so much and sort of controls women through shame and
Mhm.
sex. I love the fact that she's like, this was me, this is what I did. If you feel bad about it, that's on you. I'm good with it. And
Yeah.
I love that about her. And then the personal hero, my friend Lola Ackerman, we worked together. I helped her edit a book. She wrote the book and I worked with her to write it. Her first book, In Every Mirror, She's Black. But Lola and I have been friends for a really long time. We worked together at a travel magazine years ago, an online travel magazine. We've known each other for years, been to conferences together, and just her ability to just get stuff done, to envision what she wants and get stuff done is a huge inspiration for me. Huge, because when I doubt, I do really think like, what would Lola do? And I'm like, well, she keep going, and I keep going.
So let me ask you this. If there was a writer that's alive today that came to you and said, I need you to help me write a story or write a biography on them or something about their lives, what writer would you wish would approach you and ask you that?
Neil Gaiman. I
Yeah.
would love to talk to Neil Gaiman. Also, kind of sci-fi. Just he's had a really interesting life. He does a lot of his books. He has such a range of books. Like he breaks the so-called rule of writing, just only write in one genre. You know, he says and does things that are just kind of off the wall and get keep people off balance. And I would love to talk to him more about creativity and how he does it, and kind of also how he doesn't seem to care what other people think about him.
So what was the first story that you wrote where you were like, there's something in here that this is a path that I need to go down, or that you got a particular amount of praise, something that was seminal in your development?
In high school, I can't even remember what it was about. We had this, like, I went to a tiny, tiny high school. So everything was a little bit like slapdash. I think there was, like, I had one year, there were only 40 people in the school. And I can't remember what it was that I wrote, but I do remember I wrote like a silly news story. I mean, it wasn't silly, it was meant to be serious and sort of poking fun at the school, but while also dealing with something serious. And it was people's reactions to that, how much they loved it. And they were like, you're a writer. This is really great. The funny thing is, though, that's not how I teach writing. It's not about people's reactions. I would say it took quite a bit longer for me to really fall in love with the writing process and sort of that thing, you know, because that's what made me want to continue writing, and I always did. But the problem with writing for other people is you're always trying to do what they think you want or what you think they want. Whereas I think it works better the other way, where you're like, this is what I want to create for my audience. And I don't think I really got to that point until probably when I started traveling, which was like 15 years ago. That's when I started writing short stories and I started writing different pieces. And this story that I have not published yet, but I love it. And it's hard to place because it's very long. And it's travel writing, but it's also fiction. And I take the two together. And it's about being a writer. And it's also about a trip. When I first started traveling with my family, we were in Italy and we went to the Cinque Terre and we were in Rigonaggiore. And so it's about that. It's about spending time with family. It's about all of that and how I managed to like weave together all these different things that moves people through a journey while also telling a story that I was like, oh yeah, this is good. I like this.
You're the first person that I've ever heard that's been there. I was actually in Vernazza 2 days after 9/11, and I ran into Rick Steves
Oh,
there. So
oh my God, that's funny.
it's wild. I was in the back of a water taxi in Venice, and I had flown
Um,
into Paris on what day was it? The 4th or the 7th of September. And so I'm in the back of a water taxi, and this guy starts shooting his arms in the air, and he's like, Nuevo York, Nuevo York. And I'm like, are you talking about the 93 car bombing? Because he was really eyes wide open, and he's looking at me like, I know you're an American. What's the matter with you right now? Because I'm just calmly out
yeah.
there, just enjoying Venice. But anyway, but going to Vernazza was a trip, and I talk about that all the time. Like I had never So when you get to the end of that little stretch there, I had never seen the stars in the universe like I did over the Baltic there. It was unbelievable. Like to this day, it was science fiction to me. It was like I was finally transported to the never-ending story and I was
Uh,
living it, you know? So,
yeah, it was. We had a in Rio Maggiore. We had a similar experience where just the way the streets are there that
yeah.
you keep winding around and you end up
Uh-huh.
in all these places and the same thing. And it was really magical and exactly like you said, that the stars were really gorgeous. And then every so often you would just pop out. You'd be like, how'd I get here? And you're by the water and there'd be little fish or there's always something. Yeah, no, I hear
Yeah.
it. Very fantasy like too.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
as somebody you mentioned A Wrinkle in Time being a movie. What what book do you think was adapted the best into a movie? What's one that comes to your mind that you really enjoyed and they did a really good job of capturing it?
I mean, I'll tell you, I hate to repeat the same thing I've already said. I generally do not like movies that have been books.
Yeah,
When I love the book. I actually, okay, Fantastic Beasts, but I don't know if that was actually a book first. I think they kind of made the book afterwards.
yeah,
Um, and the Harry Potter books, I did not read them all. I did not read them all, but I have seen all the movies.
yeah,
So a book that, okay, so the book where I loved the book and then I liked the movie even more was A Wrinkle in Time. The Harry Potter books are I prefer the oh I feel like I'm gonna get a hate mail for saying this, but I preferred the movies to the books.
yeah,
I never really made it through the books. I think I got through like I read the first one, part of the second one, tried the third one. It wasn't really for me. But and Fantastic Beasts, like that for me was a very inspiring movie because I loved the creatures in it. But I don't think there's actually a book that it was based on. I think that there were things written afterwards.
yeah,
So that's
yeah,
different.
yeah. So I would imagine in this kind of nomadic existence you've had of moving around, that writing has to really be kind of a cathartic grounding event for you to kind of keep your world and your compass needle where it needs to be.
Yes, absolutely. And but I think it takes practice to get there. It
Yeah,
takes practice. You just have to writing has to become your own thing. So like when I was saying before, I that I loved other people's reaction to my writing, and that's what kind of kept me going. I really had to shift that balance to be like, what is writing to me? What do I enjoy about it? Why do I love it? So that I could always come back to it. And I mean, I'll say, like you asked about the pandemic. And just by a series of things, I was traveling right before the pandemic, landed home in Argentina as it just hit everywhere and they blocked off flights from the US. And I had to go into quarantine on my own for 2 weeks. And it screwed up my time, like my internal clock. So I was waking up at 4 in the morning, pretty much the whole pandemic,
well,
which was perfect. I would get up and then just have that time to write, which is what grounded me exactly. I would start my day and I would write about another world. I mean, that other world was actually where I live now, but 300 years in the future, another sci-fi book. And it did, and it just taught me how to get into that space where I am writing. I am loving this process of writing, even if the writing is uncomfortable, even if it's not doing what I want it to do. It's like I literally feel like I'm shaping clay when I'm writing. So, and then yeah, a lot of my pre living in Argentina and moving around on a regular basis writing, I would write stories, and I started that Rio Maggiore story when I was doing that. But it all started with my journal, where I could, where you just take your journal and a pen, and I would always bring something to color or draw with, and just go somewhere, explore, find something new, draw something, maybe take some photos, maybe write what I'm feeling, just to remember that moment. So yeah, very much grounded me. And then the journal becomes stories later on.
yeah. So what is it every day that really makes you love the written word and stories and creating those and giving those to people? What motivates you to do that?
I love it. I just love doing it. I love talking about writing. I want to tell the story. I want it to be finished. I want it to be complete, never perfect. And I feel like that's really important. If you're aiming for perfection, you're going to have a really hard time writing. If you're aiming to just explore and see what the possibility is, which is kind of how I travel too. It's how I do a lot of things. Just that feeling of, wow, what is this? And then the teaching that I do and when I work with writers, one doesn't exist without the other because I can't teach if I'm not writing. And I love working with people and helping them tell their stories, and that feeling where it's funny. Did you ever watch 6 Feet Under?
Oh man,
Um,
one of my favorite shows ever. Yeah.
yeah. Well, the final one, I'm rewatching it now. I haven't seen it in years. I don't really remember a lot of it, so I get to see it kind of all new. Early on, in the second season, which is where I am now, Brenda, um, she wants to write a book, and I'm just at that part where she's trying to write and trying to write, and there's all this stuff and like words from her mom, thoughts from her mom appear on the page. And I had the strongest feeling of like, man, I could help her write that book.
Yeah.
I want to be able to help her write that book. And I'm like, okay, she's not real, but just that feeling of like, you have a story to tell, you're stuck, I can unstick you. I can get you to write what you want to write, no matter where you are, no matter what your process is. I can help people do that. And I love that I can help them do that. And like I said, the writing part of it for me is it's my own piece, it's my own grounding. And I love to tell those stories, but it also keeps my teaching really fresh, because if I'm not writing to kind of help people write, I'm basing it on old stuff. Like, oh yeah, I did this 6 years ago. No, no, no. I'm working on this right now. This is how I'm stuck. This is why, everybody gets stuck. Everybody finds complications. Everybody feels uncomfortable. And this is why we're both going to get through it and move forward. It's just like, it's fun for me. I get to create
Yeah.
worlds.
Yeah. That ending of that show is the best ending ever. I don't think anybody will
Yes, yes,
ever.
yes. I have written about that. And I 100% agree. That's the only reason I'm rewatching it. I want to be prepared for that last episode. One of
I,
the best ever.
I,
Agreed.
I watched it years ago and I got remarried in 2019 and my wife and I watched it together and we took a trip to Colorado this summer. And as we were coming home, she did it without me knowing it. Sia did a remix of Breathe Me with Ehrlich Schnoss, who's a big time electronic producer. And like we're getting
Nice.
ready to get out of Kansas and come home, and boom, it comes up, and I'm like, whoa, like it was that whole because that music too, like just like the crescendos and how it like whoosh, everything went up, it followed it. Who was the guy that
Yep.
made that? Because he went and did that vampire series after he's so good. Um, it's gonna come to me later, but he's brilliant. Anyway, so yeah, you got my brain swimming at 6 feet under.
Yay.
What a great
Yeah,
show.
but that literally if you Google my name and 6 Feet Under, you will find that I've literally written just what you said, that final episode is probably one of my favorite things ever,
Ever.
ever.
They will
Yep.
never ever outdo that. Like everybody talks about, oh, the last episode of Seinfeld, the last episode of this, nothing. There's not even a
Nope.
close range to what they did with that show. Um,
Yeah.
so
The other thing that final episode, it's like, I guess you could call it a tool that I use for helping people write, because one of the things that episode did is like, you're done watching it, and I just had this overwhelming feeling of like, oh yeah, that is exactly what life means. That's what it's about. And that's something I say, like, now I ask people, what is it that you want people to understand and feel when they're done reading your book? And it comes directly from that episode.
yeah,
Yeah, no,
it's
we're on the
amazing.
same page
Yeah,
with.
100%. So of all of the things that you've done in your life up to this point, what are you the proudest of?
That's not fair. Um,
What?
that's not fair. Fair isn't a child's word anyway, but
Yeah.
what am I the most proud of? I'm, I guess I'm a mom, so I'm supposed to say my kids, but I'm not going to say my kids. I'm proud of them, but I think that first part where I just said, you know what, I'm not going to stay in New York anymore. I'm not going to follow the path that I was always following, that I'm supposed to follow. That's the prescribed path. And I'm going to do something that you're not supposed to do. You're not supposed to just sell everything and travel with kids and then have kids while you're traveling and then settle in another country and just take another path. Um, because that kind of started everything, because once I did that, I could do it over and over and over again and make my own choices for what I believe, and it's so much easier to unhook from what you're supposed to do or should. I hate the word should. There is no should, but it's hard to escape from it. So I think being able to unhook from, as a friend of mine says, we got off the bus. Um, that because it served me for the rest of it served me since.
So here's the final therapeutic bloodletting question.
Oh God.
All right. So everyone has a perception of you, family, friends, fans, but you run the show. What is your perception of you? Who do you think you are?
Ooh, great question. Who do I think I am? I'm someone who's still figuring it out. I'm still figuring things out. I'm still exploring. I always want to be exploring. I don't ever want, I mean, nobody knows it all, but I never want to be caught in a place where I think I know everything. I'm always exploring, learning, finding things.
So if anyone wants to get your books, learn more about you, reach out, any of that, where do they go?
You can go to my website. It's my name, leishulman.com, LEIGHSHULMAN.com. And pretty much everything of mine is there. So you can find me on social media. You'll find my social media there. Another actually good place to find me is Instagram. I chat a lot with people on Instagram, and that's the Leigh Shulman, because for whatever reason, Leigh Shulman was taken. But on my website, I have a link where people can sign up for a free lesson of what is it that you want out of your writing life. I also have lots of lessons on the blog. You can contact me there. And if you ever want to chat, Instagram is a good place to go.
So based on your answer of moving to Argentina and finding your way, there's a documentary by Rainn Wilson from Dwight from The Office, and he's kind of unhappy, been chronically unhappy. So he went out into the world to see where happiness is. He goes to Iceland, and there's all this happiness and beautiful scenery, but he runs into people that like move to remote places, and all of the racism and weird things that America gets hung up on went away, and they found happiness. So I find that enlightening. So I'm just putting that out there. I'm not a paid representative of Rainn Wilson or
Understood.
anybody else, but I think it would be really good for you to see, and anybody out there. Is a
Yeah,
wonderful
no, I
series.
agree. I've heard of it and I then forgot about it, and you have reminded me. So
Okay.
I want to watch it.
And I need to see A Wrinkle in Time. I haven't watched the movie. I've absorbed the words and made the world in my brain. So I'll have to see how all of that
Awesome.
matches up. So I'm ready to
I
go.
love that we're both walking away with a reading and watching list now.
We did,
Excellent.
we
Should
came
be.
we went through therapy and we came up with a to-do list.
Perfect.